There were so many strange things in that house that after a while, it almost became normal for us. It definitely unsettled my parents sometimes, but my sisters and I always felt strangely protected there. My parents honestly weren't easy people to grow up around. My dad was a heavy alcoholic and my mom struggled with alcohol, pills, and anger issues. The atmosphere at home could turn toxic really fast. One morning I was probably around 12 or 13, standing in the kitchen while my mom screamed at me, calling me every name she could think of. Usually I learned to tune it out, but that day it hit harder than usual. And the crazy part is, I was actually a really good kid. Honor roll student, stayed out of trouble, didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't sneak around, nothing. While she was yelling, the back door suddenly flew open and slammed shut with so much force that the little diamond-shaped windows shattered instantly. The sound was insane. She stopped screaming immediately and became completely distracted trying to figure out what had just happened. That gave me enough time to leave and spend the day at a friend's house until her mood cooled off. Another night when I was about 16, my friend Lori was staying over. She was one of the only people I ever allowed inside our house because she already knew how chaotic things were there. We got home right around midnight, which was exactly when I was supposed to be back. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, I saw the kitchen light on. That meant one of my parents was still awake, probably drunk, and I really did not want to walk into that situation. I remember sitting in the car asking Lori what we should do. She suddenly looked past me and said, "What is that?" Floating near the yard was this glowing orange ball about the size of a basketball. It moved almost playfully, bouncing around in midair. We got out of the car and started following it around the yard. Every time we got close, it would dart away again. This went on for maybe 10 minutes. Then out of nowhere, the glowing ball vanished completely. At the exact same moment, I noticed the kitchen light had gone off too. The house was dark now. Safe to go inside. Whatever that thing was, it felt almost like it intentionally kept us distracted until everything inside settled down. My oldest sister probably had the strangest experience of all. She was 18 at the time, home alone with her fiancé one hot summer weekend while the rest of us were gone. For some reason, despite the heat outside, they lit a fire in the fireplace and were sitting together on the couch. As things started getting romantic between them, the room suddenly became freezing cold. And I mean freezing. According to my brother-in-law, every time he moved closer to my sister, the temperature dropped more and more until they could literally see their breath in the air. When he backed away, the room warmed up again. That happened over 50 years ago, and even later in life he still refused to walk into that house alone. Then there was the kitchen light. There were 3 lights connected to one switch, and for years they always turned on together. Then one day, one bulb simply stopped working. My dad replaced the bulb, checked the wiring, even brought in electricians. Nobody could find anything wrong with it. One afternoon, my dad got frustrated and jokingly yelled, "Damn it, Bill, turn the light back on." And it did. Immediately. After that, whenever the light stopped working, the only thing that fixed it was asking Bill to turn it back on. Bill Hillis was supposedly the original owner of the house. He had been a contractor who dreamed of building his perfect home. But before he could fully finish it, he was diagnosed with cancer. He still managed to live there before passing away, and after his death, his ashes were scattered in the front yard. There were endless stories connected to that house. My dad would sometimes be downstairs in the garage working on woodworking projects while hearing heavy footsteps pacing back and forth directly above him in the living room. Thinking someone had broken in, he'd rush upstairs with a hammer in his hand and find absolutely nobody there. Another time, when I was around 6th grade, my parents were out and I went next door to hang out at my friend's house. We realized nobody was home at mine, so we decided to go back there for snacks and freedom. As we walked toward the house, every single light inside was on. Not just a few, all of them. The entire house glowed in the dark like something out of a movie. My friend's dad came with us because I kept insisting I hadn't done it. He thought I was exaggerating until we reached the front door and realized it was locked with the deadbolt. Impossible because I hadn't even brought the key. He lifted my friend onto the balcony so she could climb through the sliding door upstairs. The second she got inside, every light in the house was suddenly off. Pitch black. Not one lamp was on anymore. Her dad immediately made us leave and wait at his house until my parents got home. The strange activity happened constantly, but honestly, my sisters and I never felt threatened by it. If anything, it often felt like someone in that house was watching over us. One moment I'll never forget happened when I was home alone and a worker my dad hired suddenly walked into the house acting aggressive and unstable. I was terrified and slowly backing toward the panic button for the alarm system. Before I could even reach it, the alarm exploded through the entire house. Someone had already triggered it. The guy panicked and ran outside immediately. Police arrived within minutes along with my dad. Everyone assumed I pressed the button, but I kept insisting I hadn't touched it yet. When my dad quietly asked me who did it, I simply answered, "Bill." And strangely enough, my dad completely accepted that answer. Objects also disappeared constantly. Small random things nobody would steal. We'd search everywhere for days and never find them, until someone jokingly asked Bill to put the item back. And somehow it usually showed up shortly afterward. Growing up around all this made me completely unafraid of paranormal stuff. For us, it wasn't horror movie scary. It was just part of everyday life. I think that's why, later in life, I became much more open to spiritual experiences than most people are. I never built that fear around the unknown because I grew up with it constantly around me. I still laugh remembering when movies like The Exorcist or Amityville Horror came on TV. My dad would immediately shut them off because he didn't want to give Bill any ideas. And he was completely serious about it. Looking back now as an adult, especially considering how difficult life at home could be, I honestly appreciate whatever presence was there more than I did back then. It always felt like it protected us when we needed it most. And strangely enough, after I moved out, the last of the kids to leave that house, the activity stopped too. Almost like Bill's job there was finally finished. When I was around 11 years old, I went to spend some time at my grandmother's village in western Ukraine. She adored flowers and had a beautiful garden full of them. It was early spring, the season when snowdrops start blooming, and one day she asked me to go into the forest and pick some for her. My older sister came with me, she was 19 back then. To reach the forest, we had to cross a massive field that stretched steeply uphill. At the top of the hill, the forest already came into view. Before the climb started, we passed a few isolated houses standing away from the rest of the village, and then an abandoned military base. That base already felt unsettling on its own. Broken concrete buildings, rusted metal everywhere, complete silence. We wandered around there for a while messing around like kids, then continued toward the forest to collect snowdrops. But there was one place that felt especially wrong. Almost in the middle of the slope stood a strange hill that slightly rose out from the hillside. And right in the center of it grew 3 enormous oak trees, arranged almost in a perfect triangle. Even as a child, I remember feeling uncomfortable whenever I looked at them. We filled an entire basket with snowdrops and eventually started walking back down the hill. While heading downhill, I noticed little piles of hay or straw scattered all over the ground. Being a kid, I started stepping on them for fun. My sister immediately told me, "Don't step on those, you could wake something up." I laughed it off and kept walking. A few moments later, though, I suddenly got this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching us from behind. I can't explain why, but I felt almost forced to turn around. So I looked back toward the hill with the 3 oak trees. And that's when I saw it. Between the trees was a figure floating in the air. Not standing, floating. It looked like a woman wearing a long white dress. Her black hair completely covered her face. The image instantly reminded me of something out of a horror movie. What terrified me most was that she wasn't touching the ground at all. She just hovered there silently between the trees. At first I froze completely. I blinked several times, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the figure stayed there. Without looking away, I grabbed my sister's arm and told her to turn around. I'll never forget her reaction. Her face went pale instantly, her eyes widened in pure fear, and I felt her hand shaking in mine. Very quietly, almost under her breath, she whispered, "Run." And we did. We sprinted downhill across that field as fast as we could. At one point while running, I glanced back again to see whether the figure was following us. But it was gone. Only a few seconds had passed since we started running, yet there was absolutely nothing near the trees anymore. We didn't stop until we were nearly a kilometer away. Somewhere during the panic, we dropped almost all the flowers we had picked. Later, when we told our grandmother what happened, she became strangely serious. She told us that during World War II, people were supposedly tortured and executed near those oak trees. What makes this even stranger to me is that years later I heard very similar stories from other people. One of my friends once told me that while staying at a countryside house near a forest, she stepped onto the balcony late at night and saw almost the exact same figure in the distance. A woman in white with long dark hair, moving through the trees without seeming to actually walk. Even now, after all these years, I still can't explain what we saw that day. Maybe it was just fear and imagination. Maybe something else entirely. But the feeling from that place, that heavy silence and pure terror, never really left me. As I mentioned before, there aren't many neighbors around my house in the village. Most of the houses nearby are either completely abandoned or so old that they're slowly falling apart. When my friends and I were kids, we used to treat those places like adventure spots. We'd sneak inside them almost every day pretending we were ghost hunters, even though most of the time we never actually found anything. Still, some of those houses always felt wrong in a way I can't properly explain, and even now when I think about them, they still make me uncomfortable. There were two houses in particular that always stood out to me, but one of them stayed in my mind more than the others. Me and my 4 friends used to call it G.R's house. It was a 2-story house directly across from mine, and no matter what stage of my life I think back to, I always remember seeing that house through my window. I lived in 2 different rooms while growing up. First I stayed downstairs when I was younger, and later during my teenage years I moved into an upstairs room where I stayed until I finished school. From both windows, that house was always there. The strange thing is that I actually remember the people who lived there. I remember G.R and his wife clearly, even though I was really young back then. I must have been around 4 years old when his wife died, and maybe 8 when G.R himself passed away. What always stayed with me was the last time I saw him. Whenever my bicycle broke, I'd take it to him because he was good at fixing things. One day my chain came loose again, so I walked over looking for him. He wasn't inside the house, and I figured he was probably in the backyard because he spent most of his time there growing vegetables and fruit. I remember spotting him from a distance and calling out to him. He turned toward me and started walking over, but after only a few steps he suddenly collapsed onto the ground. I froze for a second because I didn't understand what had happened. Then I ran to call the neighbors and they came to help him. I never saw him alive again after that. I was at his funeral a few days later, but that's my last real memory of him. Years passed, and once we got older, me and my friends started sneaking around the property more often. Right beside the house there was a huge old cow shed attached to it, and honestly it was even bigger than the house itself. It had 2 floors too. The top part was used for storage, while the lower floor was where the cows used to stay, but because the lower level was partly underground, it always looked pitch black inside even during the daytime. Back then we thought it looked terrifying. Most of the time we'd just wander around the yard surrounding the house. Honestly, the place would have looked beautiful if it wasn't abandoned. There was this massive walnut tree growing near the middle of the yard, and underneath it stood a small 1-story building that was used as both a storage room and a bathhouse. The whole property was full of garages, basements, and storage rooms packed with old belongings nobody had touched in years. For the longest time, we thought the actual house itself was locked. Then one day we accidentally found an open window around the back that led straight into the kitchen. The second we climbed inside, the entire place felt different. Everything was covered in dust. The walls looked darker than they should have been, like years of smoke and age had stained them permanently. There were old armchairs, religious icons hanging on the walls, porcelain dolls sitting in corners, faded furniture, and all kinds of strange little objects scattered around the rooms. It honestly looked less like an abandoned house and more like somebody had simply disappeared one day and never came back. We explored almost every room, but there was one room none of us wanted to enter. The bedroom. Even during the daytime it felt darker than the rest of the house. The walls were painted dark green, heavy black curtains covered the windows, and 2 old-fashioned beds stood against opposite sides of the room. That was the room where G.R's wife died. I remember my grandmother telling me that before her death, she slowly lost her mind. According to her, the woman used to wander outside late at night, moving silently around the yard like she was sleepwalking. The staircase leading to the 2nd floor was outside the house facing the front yard, and apparently she would go up and down those stairs over and over again in the middle of the night. After she died, G.R kept sleeping in that same bedroom until he died too. So none of us ever went inside it. Not back then anyway. One thing I always found strange was the photographs around the house. Inside the living room there was a picture hanging on the wall of a young man I didn't recognize. But weirdly enough, the same photo was also hanging outside near one of the 2nd floor windows. I think there was also a photo of G.R's wife hanging outside too. The pictures were small, so you wouldn't notice them unless you knew exactly where to look, but once you spotted them, it felt strange. I remember thinking how odd it was for someone to hang family photographs outside their house where random people walking down the street could see them. Later I found out the young man in the picture was their oldest son who had died in a war years earlier. For a long time we also thought the 2nd floor was locked, but eventually we realized the door wasn't locked at all. It had just been pulled shut the whole time. When we finally got upstairs, it wasn't nearly as creepy as we expected. There were old clothes everywhere, stacks of photographs, dusty shelves, and random forgotten objects. One of my friends even found old Soviet-era coins and metro tokens lying inside a drawer. But none of us took anything. There's an old saying where I'm from. If something isn't yours, it won't bring you anything good. At the time, none of this really felt scary to us. It was just another abandoned house we explored because we were bored kids looking for excitement. But years later, something happened there that I still think about. One night, I invited a friend over to my house. We were sitting in my room listening to music, drinking a little, smoking a little too, but we weren't drunk or anything close to it. I was playing guitar while my friend sat beside the window looking outside. Suddenly, he told me to stop playing. The way he said it immediately made me nervous. Then he quietly told me to turn off the lights. I remember looking at him confused for a second before doing it anyway. The second the room went dark, he pointed toward the house across from mine. There was a light moving inside it. At first I thought maybe it was just headlights reflecting through the windows, but it wasn't. The light was moving room to room slowly, like somebody was walking through the house holding a flashlight. My friend looked at me and said, "Wait, I thought nobody lived there anymore." I remember trying to answer casually, but honestly I felt cold all over watching it. We sat there silently in the dark staring at the windows while the light kept moving around inside the house. Then eventually it disappeared. We waited for a long time afterward thinking maybe somebody would come outside, but nobody ever did. To this day I still don't know what we saw. Maybe somebody broke in and decided to stay there for the night. That would honestly make the most sense. There are a lot of drug addicts in my village, and in another abandoned house near mine we constantly used to find syringes, homemade pipes, and all kinds of things like that. But the strange part is that inside G.R's house, we never found anything like that. Not once.